to have that happen again. Secondly, I don't underestimate who ultimately is the most important in helping us beat this pandemic, and that's the American public themselves.
I get that, but I find that to be a frustrating narrative too, because certainly all individuals have to take on some responsibilities to be able to do this, but that feels like we're pushing it off to them. And it feels like that the responsibility is now being pushed to the American people coming out from that. And for instance, as you know, Congress, we passed legislation back in April that includes $25 billion in additional funding for testing and tracing. I'm still hearing that a lot of that hasn't been used. So I wanted to ask you if you have knowledge of how much of money hasn't been spent on this, and whether or not the OMB or any other part of the government is holding up access to be able to do that, so we have the capabilities and the resources to be able to continue to increase our capabilities.
It's important, Congressman. Of that money, of that $25 billion, which is a significant amount of money, $10.25 billion came to CDC. And we got that money out to the states, tribes, local, and county health departments literally within 2, 3, 4 weeks, and that's been all distributed.
One last question here, Dr. Fauci. Do you have thoughts on using rapid antigen testing or paper strip testing, things like that can create more point-of-care response?
Yeah, I can answer that one. Sure, anything that gets us a quicker, more rapid, more scale-up capability of testing is something that would be desirable. And in fact, that was one of the things I mentioned very quickly in the third component of the NIH strategic plan, the RADx, which is about $500 million, to try and develop exactly the kinds of tests that you're talking about. Rapid, point of care, highly sensitive, highly specific.
Well, let's try to work on that together.
The gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Orlowski, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Fauci, for hanging out with us. Really appreciate it. I think the one question that I have left today, and I think it's a question the American people want to know, my district certainly wants to know in Indiana, is it your opinion, do you believe that China covered up the origins of the crisis? You are in this closer than anybody else in our country, and the American people listen to what you have to say. I've been asking lots of questions since this committee was created, because I think China needs to be held to a much higher standard than we're holding them. But do you believe China covered up the origins of the crisis?
Congresswoman, it really depends on what you mean, origin of the crisis.
The beginning of the pandemic, the disease itself, as it broke on TV and we saw it.
Well, I think from what we know, and I'm sure Bob can also comment on that, from the conversations that we had early on, it was led to believe that early on that this was jumping from an animal to a human in the context of the wet market in Wuhan, and that it was inefficient virus that just jumped from an animal to a human and didn't necessarily spread very well from human to human, at a time when it was clear that there was at least a few weeks and maybe more of transmission from human to human that we didn't know about. And then when we finally found out that it was a highly efficient transmitter from human to human, it would have been nice to know about that sooner.
Sarah, do you think China is a threat to the American vaccine research that we've been talking about for the past 3 hours?
Did China do what with the vaccine?
Do you believe that China is still a threat today to the American vaccine research after
No, I don't think so at all. I think one of the things people need to understand, that what we do is really transparent. We publish it, we announce it. So if they want to hack into a computer and find out what the results of a vaccine trial are, they're going to hear about it in the New England Journal of Medicine in a few days anyway.
So, when I testified earlier, I was talking about the fact that just a few days ago that our country indicted by the Justice Department 2 Chinese nationals for hacking the heroes that are working on a vaccine. China has obstructed every single thing that we've done, turn that we've made, place that we go, starting all the way back with PPE. And I was very involved in my district in trying to get PPE, and China was obstructing every single part of the way. So I think, my fellow folks in my district and in this country believe otherwise. I think the American people want to make sure when we're talking about safe vaccines and we're talking about the FDA and we're not shortcutting safety and those kinds of things. I don't know how in the world that we can stand there and say, no, I don't think China's a threat to the vaccine production in this country when we just indicted 2 people, and not just 2, but I think that question is so important, Madam Chairwoman. I think it's so important. I want to re-ask my question. I see our chairman's not here, but to you, Madam Chairwoman, I think we need to investigate that answer on cybersecurity. We've already indicted more than 2 people, but just 2 people in the last couple of days ago. Why can't we have a hearing in here? And I understand the chairman has said before, well, there's other committees having hearings on the role of China, but nobody's having a hearing on the role of China versus the producers in America and the vaccine process that we're looking for, the heroes that are trying to save lives. That would be appropriate for this committee. Can we get a commitment? Can I get a commitment from you sitting in for the chairman that we will actually have a hearing and look at this?
This committee is chaired by Mr. Clyburn.
Right now it's chaired by you, Madam.
I do not intend to give you an answer to a question about how to run this committee in his absence. You may address him when he returns, not me.
I appreciate that answer, and I will, but I think for the record, I think we still are owed an answer as to why we can't look at that in this committee. There's no other committee set up to look at the vaccine process of oversight than this one, especially having you gentlemen here today. So I would yield back my time and add that for the record. Thank you, Dr. Fauci.
Who do we have next coming?
Foster.
Foster. Can't do it. Mr. Foster, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to our witnesses. Well, first off, I'd like to second the comments of my colleague, Representative Dr. Mark Green, on the letter that was recently sent from this committee providing for ongoing real-time bipartisan oversight of Operation Warp Speed by the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, with Dr. Green and myself as the bipartisan points of contact directing the GAO of points of interest to the committee. In my time in science, I was involved in billion-dollar research projects that were subject to GAO oversight. They would bring in outside experts, they'd ask hard questions, and they report back to Congress the truth as they see it. Both from a technical and scientific point of view and also a project management point of view, which can often be critical. GAO is fastidiously nonpartisan. They will give us real-time briefings, staff briefings and member briefings, and periodic reports on the progress of vaccine and therapeutic manufacturing under Operation Warp Speed. But they will only give us briefings on a bipartisan basis, which I think is very valuable, because it will be crucial that people believe when vaccines and therapeutics become available that the process was not politicized, that we actually have bipartisan agreement that reasonable decisions, free of conflicts of interest or political intrusion, are being made. And the GAO is intent on not becoming a tool for partisan advantage, which really helps our government work better. So an example of the sort of thing that I'm interested in having them look into is something I was discussing with Dr. Redfield over the break, which is monoclonal antibody therapeutic manufacturing. There's a lot of the good news is that there is in fact a strong immune response to this virus by the human immune system. This means, among other things, that vaccines are more likely than not to work, and it also means that antibody therapeutics are more likely than not to work, as they have against recent viruses. So we may be in this position where, there's a miracle cure that can then prevent or cure COVID-19, but we do not have the manufacturing to meet the demand, especially given the ongoing flare-up of COVID-19 in our country. And so that you can imagine the politics of that will become extremely fraught rapidly when we have to decide how to dispense this potentially life-saving therapeutics. And so it's also a circumstance in which aggressive project management may be crucial. You can imagine, and if you want to produce the maximum number of antibodies, you may say, okay, we are going to choose the most effective antibody from company A. We are going to produce it using the optimized cell lines from company B, and we're going to use the high volume production equipment on company C. This will require things like the Defense Production Act being used at their fullest to just leapfrog around issues of things like intellectual property. Already the companies that are optimizing cell lines are getting into patent fights and so on. We don't have time for that. And so one of the things I'd like the GAO to look into is to make sure that we have in advance the sort of project management, that the contracts that are being made with all of these companies anticipate this, or that discussions for the applications of the Defense Production Act, are actually taking place ahead of when they'll be needed. It's just one of many examples there. And so I just want to encourage, both of you and HHS generally to greet with open arms the GAO oversight. They can, it's not always fun being subject to GAO oversight, but their questions actually make the projects better. And so, also, I think you've probably been involved with projects that have been involved with GAO oversight, and so there's a career-long association of the GAO personnel and the agencies they represent, and so that it's not like you're getting a letter from Congress where you just kind of roll your eyes and try to do the minimum. These are serious questions by professionals. So when Dr. Green and I intend to use that to provide real bipartisan information to this committee and to Congress and to the American people about what's really happening. And I think that will be crucial. So any of you, and do you have any comments on other things that we can do to really make the public confident that the right decisions are being made for the right reasons in this?
Well, thank you for that, Congressman Foster. Yes, I mean, the fact is that we are very transparent in what goes on in Operation Warp Speed. I have been...
But there have been public comments by the scientists, the active collaboration, which was set up by HHS. Some of the scientists involved in that said, I have no idea what's behind one of the Operation Warp Speed decisions.
Right. So in direct answer to your question, I think you brought up a good point about the monoclonal antibodies. We didn't get an opportunity to mention this in any of the questions, but monoclonal antibodies, just this week, there were 2 trials that have been initiated, one in an outpatient basis for early patients, one in an inpatient for more advanced patients, which we really have a lot of anticipation that is going to be something that is going to be an important tool in the armamentarium of how we treat COVID-19 patients. So I wanted to get that in because I think that's really important. Regarding the scrutiny of a GAO or otherwise, I have been, in the many years that I've been doing this, had many GAO looking into the things I've done. In fact, I have found it in many respects very helpful.
Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Velasquez, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to get back to the delays in testing. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania recently found that testing sites serving communities of color in big cities are fewer in number, have longer lines, and often run out of tests faster when compared to sites in wider areas in those same cities. As former Federal Reserve chairs Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen told the Select Committee, nothing is more important for restoring economic growth than improving public health. Yet we have the president that says, slow down testing, please. And the most vulnerable among us are being impacted. Frontline workers, small businesses that cannot reopen safely, and Black and Latino populations. So I have some questions along these lines. Dr. Fauci, I have a simple question for you. Do you attribute this inability to control the virus to the delays in testing and contact tracing?
Yes. Thank you. Control of the virus is clearly a multifaceted process that involves many things, the most important of which is what we were just speaking about before, about testing, about masks, crowds, outdoor versus indoor, distances, et cetera, et cetera. We've been through that multiple times during this hearing. Testing is a part of the process, but the process of controlling infection when you're talking about contact tracing, obviously you need testing, and you need testing back within a reasonable period of time. And the concern that you're expressing is for the days that it takes, and Admiral Giroir has addressed that several times during this hearing. But testing is a part of the comprehensive approach, not the only thing,
Sure.
but as part of the approach.
Thank you. South Korea had rapid results for testing and tracing, and the virus is essentially contained there or gone. Do you agree that what they did with respect to testing helped those countries get the virus under control?
Virus and the control of some of the Asian countries were due to a number of factors. Their ability to shut down almost completely, as I mentioned in a remark before, to the tune of 90+%.
Did they rush to reopen the economy?
No, they shut down. They had the capability because they got down to a very low baseline to do adequate identification, isolation, and contact tracing. Right now, they are trying to reopen. It's going to remain to be seen how successfully they do that.
So, for the record, does testing result in the U.S. seeing more COVID cases or are other factors causing the spread? Does testing result in the U.S. seeing more COVID cases or are other factors causing the spread?
Both. Both. Both.
So, are we seeing more COVID-19 cases in the U.S. because of the testing results?
Obviously, if you do more testing, you're going to see more cases.
Okay.
But the increases that we're seeing are real increasing in cases, as also reflected by increasing in hospitalization and increasing in deaths.
Why is that professional sport leagues can get testing turnaround times within 24 hours, but we cannot do it for all Americans?
Well, some of the sports clubs have been using the rapid test, which is really very different from the test that requires extraction of DNA and takes time in a different machine. So they have bought a bunch of machines that allow testing to take place where you get a positive back in 5 minutes and you could declare negative in 15 minutes.
Dr. Redfield, do you support the fact, do you agree with the fact that there is a disproportionate testing going on among Latinos, Black, Native Americans?
I wish the Admiral was here to answer it, but I've heard him answer this before, and Tony may comment, that he has set up disproportionately these testing sites in areas that have indications of more complex social economic status. I don't remember the exact number, maybe Tony does, but more than 70% intentionally trying to target areas that may be more disadvantaged. So I wouldn't agree with that statement, but I would like the Admiral to be able to get back to you with the specifics.
So you haven't seen the long lines in the urban cities and also in states where we have large population of Latinos and Blacks?
I've seen the television lines. What I was trying to say when you said, was it specifically disproportionate for Hispanic, Latino, or African American or Native Americans? And I'm not comfortable supporting that comment. I would rather get the specific data from the Admiral, which I do think the system has really gone over the other way to try to make sure we've enhanced the community health centers and these federally assisted testing sites in areas that are specifically more disadvantaged.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair yields 5 minutes to Mr. Raskin.
See, once more, if you'll pay attention to what he just said, he's talking about the disadvantaged. There's going to be, and it's based upon the dynamics of that area pertaining to whatever government that you're dealing with. Right now they're talking about the Latino South America areas, but based upon the dynamics of whether or not the availability is even in that area towards being tested is going to be a determining factor on the disadvantaged. The disadvantaged is not just the poorest of the poor, but the disadvantaged are those who are in control of that particular sector, that particular area. If you look at how each government performs, you have the richest of the rich that are on top, that are in various states and various locations. These are the people that's going to be taken care of regardless of what happens. I don't care if a nuclear bomb was to blow off and all of a sudden everybody be exposed to a certain amount of radiation. Those particular people that we're talking about will be the first ones to enter into a prepping station down below, to the point of having food and water and staying away from the radiation because they can afford it. They're the richest of the rich. It's the same way with any type of catastrophe or emergency or a crisis that's going on. Then you got the second tier. Then you got the third tier. Then you got the fourth and the fifth tier. Probably goes all the way down to about, and I'm just using this as a quick analogy. I don't have no board in front of me as far as no formula, but I'm going to use a 10-tier formula. And of course, the top tier being the richest of the rich, and the bottom tier being the poorest of the poor. 1 out of 10. 10 being the highest of the richest. 1 or 0 being basically the poorest of the poor. You got areas right now in Memphis, Tennessee that have been tested. They know for a fact that they don't have the coronavirus. Their health is good. They're up to par. And they're going and blowing. But then again, you got other areas down towards Orange Mound where people are living in the slums that are considered your low tier areas that probably won't never get tested. Unless the disease hits that area or hits that person to the effect that they actually have to be tested. Why is that? It's all based around availability. It's not what you know, but who you know. Talking about the system being unfair and how that it picks and chooses its victims based upon who you are and where you are. This not only goes on in South America, but it goes on throughout the world. It doesn't matter if you're in Russia, Rome, Italy, France, Germany, China, North Korea, South Korea, America, Canada, Mexico. The wealthiest of the wealthy always wind up with the deeper, darker, better looking steaks, while the rest of us basically eat the crumbs that fall from the master's tables. It's always been that way. Is it fair? No. Is it right? No. But is it going on? Yes. It's not only going on in South America and Mexico, it's going on right here in the good old USA. Based upon where you are, who you are, and whether or not you're living in Orange Mound or you're living in Germantown. If you're living in Germantown up towards Cordova, I'm pretty sure they've had all kinds of testing stations with signs up, free test, and the first person that feels like that they have so much as a cold will pull in there and see if they possibly have this coronavirus. But then again, you go down towards Orange Mound, and I'm just using Memphis, Orange Mound as an example. There's thousands of them all over the country, depending upon what area that you're in. St. Louis, Nashville, Chicago, whatever. Then again, you go down towards Orange Mountain, it don't matter how sick you are, you can't find a testing station nowhere. Based upon the location. It's the same way, not only in your third world countries, but right here in the USA. It may not be as prevalent of it going on right here in the USA, but it still goes on to a certain degree, because the way that we value people's importance is based upon their income and what kind of nest egg that they have built up. And whenever I say a nest egg, I'm just not talking about the money that they currently have in the bank, but their land, their property, their material things that they have obtained throughout their life. That's how America values the importance of one person versus another. In other words, it doesn't matter if you're a drug dealer. It doesn't matter if you got rich off of drugs and now you're living in a $2 million home. The fact of the matter is, you own a $2 million home. And if you own a $2 million home, you're going to stick out and beyond and above everybody else that's still living in a $250,000 home or a $100,000 home. See what I'm saying? It doesn't matter if you obtained your assets legally or illegally. It doesn't matter if you inherited those assets or you didn't inherit those assets. The bottom line is you have those assets. And because you have those assets, you can afford to pay an extra $4 or $5 for a good ribeye or a New York strip steak or a T-bone steak versus somebody that can't. It's based upon the depth of your pockets rather than who we actually are, which instantly makes the system corrupt and unjust. Anytime you're basing the value of people's souls, one person's soul being more valuable than another person's soul because that person drives a Cadillac versus this person here that only drives a Pinto, you are profiling that person, and that is not supposed to be going on, not only in America, but it's not supposed to be going on in the world. And we know for a fact that it's going on, and it's probably going to continue to go on until the very end of the ages. That's just how people use a ruler engaging an individual of whether or not he or she is better or greater or less greater or less better than another individual is based upon to their assets, based upon to what they have achieved in their lifetime. So you have to ask the question, well, what about the people in Orange Mountain? What about the people in the Bronx? What about the people that live in the scum, in some of the scum areas? Do they have a snowball chance in hell? To some degree, yes, and to some degree, no. I've looked at those type of people in those areas like a bunch of crabs that you would walk into a crab house, let's say Red Lobster, and there's a whole aquarium full of lobsters in the center of their dining area that you walk into, and if you'll sit and watch them long enough, you'll watch one crab that finally gets the better benefit over the other crabs to the point that he's got his one arm stuck over the aquarium, over the edge of the aquarium, and he's right there at the edge of fixing to pull himself out of the water to the point of freeing himself from being entrapped in the aquarium. and all of a sudden another crab will grab that crab and jerk him back into the water, jerk him back into the aquarium. That's the way that I see the disease of poverty. Whenever you're infested with poverty to the point of being poorer than poor, it's kind of like those crabs that if they ever see you starting to get ahead, they'll deliberately try to drag you down. That's the type of sick society that we live in. They'll deliberately try to drag you down so that you won't get ahead of the other person or the other crabs. And you may be saying, would you be, that's a very piss poor analogy of people that live in the slums and live in the infested areas. Well, it may be, but that's just how that I have judged the analogy off of how that birds of a feather tend to flock together. And the reason why that birds of a feather flock together, because if that one bird starts getting out of the herd, the other birds will get him back into that same herd. In other words, if you're a sinner and you've been raised as a sinner, and you're perverted, and you live in sin, and all of a sudden you become saved, and you decide, well, I'm no longer going to fluctuate my life in that type of activity, and you start deviating away from those people that help to draw you into that sin, the next thing you know, they'll go out of their way to drag you back into the sin. They'll go out of their way to get you back to smoking again, or get you back to doing drugs again, or get you back to running coke, or whatever again. They'll go out of their way. Birds of a feather flock together. The rich ordinarily fly with the rich birds. Then you got 10 tiers all the way down to the bottom. Then you got the bottom tier. The poor birds fly with the poor birds. That poor bird, according to the flock, isn't supposed to get out of its tier. And if it ever does start getting out of its tier, the rest of them will gripe and complain and try to drag that one bird back into that same tier. That's the way that I have done an analogy of the human beings, the Homo sapiens up onto this planet. Similar towards the way that you would witness a bunch of crabs. And if that one crab ever starts to escape from that aquarium, there'll be another crab that will pull that crab in. Don't ask me why that the dynamics has a tendency of doing that. I guess it's out of greed, selfishness. It's like, well, if I'm in here, you're not escaping. You're going to stay in here too as well. In other words, if I'm suffering, you're going to suffer. If I'm going through pain, you're going to go through pain. If I'm hurting, you're going to be hurting. Which is the very opposite of what Jesus taught. Jesus taught to get out of the darkness and to come into the light. And then after you have come into the light, Jesus taught to go out as disciples and to try to influence or be a desirable figure to the point that you pull others out of the darkness so that they will go into the light. In other words, you have succeeded in getting off of drugs and getting off of tobacco and quitting this and quitting that. Now it's your job to go out and try to convince others of getting out of that same darkness and coming to the light. It's almost like it's two different magnets. You got a magnet of the darkness, you got a magnet of the light. You got one magnet that's become very, very powerful. Probably more powerful today than what it's ever been. towards wanting to draw people that much more further into the darkness. And then you got a magnet that's pulling people out of the darkness into the light. And these constant opposites are in competition with each other on a day-to-day, hour for hour, minute for minute, everyday scale. It's almost like a war that's going on between the good, trying to draw the bad from the bad into the good, and then you got the bad trying to draw those who has escaped from the bad over to the good, back over to the bad. It's war. It's a constant conflict. It is something that Satan created thousands of years ago whenever he decided to inflict society with his disease and challenge the kingdom. And it's something that we as the saints have to learn to overcome, just as the scriptures talks about in the first 4 chapters of Revelations. He who shall overcometh, he who shall overcometh, he who shall overcometh, he who shall overcometh will be able to escape a lot of these things. He who shall overcometh will not be hurt of the second death. He who shall overcometh will not be hurt of the second death. In other words, once you have proven your identity through the light, because of the light, in the light, towards getting out of the darkness, because of it, your reward will be that you won't have to worry about going through that second remorseful, horrible death, that spiritual death that it talks of after the great white throne judgment, the 1,000-year millennium. After the 1,000-year millennium and the great white throne judgment is whenever people will go through that second death, that spiritual death. But if you're not strong enough to endure, overcome, in this lifetime of that darkness that is befallen upon to you because of the light, you may very well not stand a chance towards overcoming it in the world to come, in the spirit world. Whenever we look at how God himself is going to separate the sheep from the goats in the last days. Once more, God will do it in tears himself. And it won't be 10 tears. The way that I understand it, we're in tier number 1 right now in the life that we're living. If by some reason you do not prove your ability in this lifetime to the point that it's questionable in the lifetime to come, then you'll go through tier number 2. Once you have failed in tier number 2, then is whenever it would have been best if you had never been born. Because after failing in tier number 2, there is no tier number 3. There is no tier number 4. There is no tier number 5 in the eyes of the Almighty pertaining to the supernatural world, pertaining to the big game.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And if you're trying to still figure out why the administration and our Republican colleagues cannot formulate a plan of action, look no further than the disgraceful diversions and distractions of some of our colleagues today. I want to address the First Amendment line of questioning first. Our distinguished colleague from Ohio keeps raising, for some reason, the Supreme Court decision in South Bay United Pentecostal Church versus Newton, which rejected his position just about 6 weeks ago in a 5-4 decision. There, a church said that the restrictions limiting the number of people who could go to church to 100 were perfectly constitutional because that was the exact same rule that applied to lectures, concerts, movies, spectator sports, theatrical performances, political party gatherings, and so on. In other words, there was no religious discrimination taking place, which is why the Supreme Court rejected the claim, and there is no religious free exercise exemption to public health orders, as you were indicating, I think, Dr. Fauci. So the parties in the case cited numerous cases of church gatherings with people unmasked, singing, chanting, and so on, that became super spreader events. There is no religious immunity to this disease, and there is no free exercise exemption to universal public health orders. Now, as for protest, let us not confuse the issue. Whether your protest is a right-wing protest, like Boogaloo and Proud Boys and anti-public health order protesters, like the ones who threatened the life of Governor Whitmer and tried to shut down the Michigan legislature and succeeded in doing so, or it's the nonviolent assemblies of millions of people with Black Lives Matter across the country, the kind endorsed by our late beloved colleague John Lewis, the champion of nonviolence, the same rules must apply. If a jurisdiction has a 6-foot rule and a masking rule, which I assume and hope every one of them does, it applies equally to everybody. And the preliminary results suggest, and I know because I've been to a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests, is people are not getting infected there as much because they are observing those rules. Obviously, when you go to an anti-public health order, anti-masking protest, like the kinds that shut down the legislature in Michigan, most people are not wearing masks and are not observing the public health protocols they've come to try to destroy. So if you're really concerned about the protests and people getting sick there, and we should be, then we have to look at the use of tear gas and pepper spray. Everybody saw the secret federal officers who were assembled by Attorney General Barr in Oregon remove the mask of a naval veteran and spray pepper spray right in his face. That's extremely dangerous to remove someone's mask and then to have them sneezing and coughing and so on. So it's the use of those chemical irritants, I think, which is the real danger. But Admiral Gerard, what I wanted to ask you was about the role that Jared Kushner has played in developing the administration's approach to, is he still with us, or is he? Oh, he's gone now. Okay. Well, Dr. Fauci, let me turn to you then. Are you aware of the role that Jared Kushner has played in developing the administration's approach to diagnostic testing?
I have no knowledge of that, Congressman, because I've not been involved in that. It's barely been Admiral Gerard being involved in that.
Okay. Well, then I'm sorry I missed Mr. Gerard in the second round. But yesterday, Vanity Fair reported something astonishing, which is that Jared Kushner recognized that there was no plan, and he formed a secret working group at the White House in March and April to develop a national testing plan, which operated in a, quote, bubble and did not coordinate with other experts at HHS. And they actually came up with a very detailed and potentially effective national testing plan. One person involved said it wasn't rocket science, but it was a real plan in which the government would coordinate the distribution of test kits in an aggressive program of contact tracing across the country. But the White House reportedly dropped the plan, according to this article, how Jared Kushner's secret testing plan went poof into thin air. Okay, the White House dropped the plan on the political logic that the outbreak was going to be limited to Democratic states. This is back in March in New York and New Jersey. And you remember there was a lot of talk about how this was a blue state disease, and there was somehow some kind of political or ideological immunity to getting it. So they thought it would be a better strategy just to pit the states against each other in that vicious free-for-all for equipment and materials, and then blame the governors when everything went wrong. And we've seen the shocking, devastating results of just letting it go and not having a plan at all. With that, I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. I think we've finished our second round of questions. And I would like to now yield to the ranking member for any closing statement he might want to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank our witnesses for coming here, including Dr. Gerard, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Redfield. You're on the front lines, as well as the teams that are behind you, working to implement President Trump's plan to combat this virus. In fact, Dr. Gerard left to go address thousands of people who work under him. He talked about 7,000 deployments that have been made under President Trump's command to have men and women in uniform going on the front lines to help at the state and local level. We've seen so much work being done in this plan, and I keep going back to it because I know some people want to deny.
I'm John King in Washington. You're listening now to the closing statements. This is the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus. This has been a hearing now for several hours. Three key members of President Trump's coronavirus task force, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Robert Redfield of the CDC, and Admiral Brett Giroir, the testing czar, have all been testifying for several hours. It has been largely a political hearing. Republicans making their case. That was Steve Scalise, the ranking Republican and a member of the leadership at the end, of saying the president has had a plan from day one, and Democrats just don't like it. But Steve Scalise making the point it has been effective. The Democrats saying, no, the president may have had a plan on paper, but he has not implemented it well. He has not coordinated well with the governments. He has allowed a big testing backlog to develop, and he's allowed states to plow through the White House task force's own cautious reopening guidelines. Let's bring in Dr. Leanna Wen to discuss. She's an emergency room physician, the former Baltimore City Health Commissioner. Dr. Wen, it's good to see you again. Unfortunately, for most people watching at home, there was a lot of politics here. We're 90 days from an election, so I guess some of that is inevitable. You were listening throughout. Do you have a major takeaway? Did you learn anything new, anything helpful?
Well, the main question that I had going into this, John, was what is our national plan? Do we have one? I mean, that was the name of the hearing, the urgent need for a national plan. And I don't have an answer to this question. Either we have one and somehow that can't be articulated, or we don't have one and we are now 6 months into the pandemic. I guess I just don't know what this national strategy is, even on something as basic as the need for rapid testing. I thought it was just actually quite unbelievable that we've heard answers to, well, why can't we get 48-hour testing? And the answer is, well, we'll be able to do that sometime in the future. But we should have been able to anticipate that these surges of infections would occur. And I think so much of our response has been reacting to what's happened rather than anticipating what's ahead.
And we have talked about this many times before. The data was certainly before them. The White House had it. The Coronavirus Task Force report, some documents that have leaked, make clear that they have had it. One of the interesting things, to your point, we have a testing backlog now because the demand is so high. Even as they did ramp up, they did not get the baseline down, so that you have so many people now. And that was the most interesting part to me, was Dr. Fauci conceding essentially the reason the European countries, the reason most of the Asian countries have done so much better is because when they shut down, they stayed shut down. They shut down just about everything, and they stayed shut down until they hammered the baseline down to a minimum number of cases. So then you're dealing with it from a position of strength. He said roughly about 50% of the United States shut down. So even when the economy was reopened, you never got down to a low baseline, and 20,000 was about the lowest, 20,000 average cases a new day. Now we're seeing 60,000 plus. Their recommendation, Dr. Wen, was that they believe if you wear a mask, social distance, have hand hygiene, avoid big crowds, that Dr. Redfield said then he believes you can get this back under control without shutting down more. Do you believe that?
I think it could have happened if we did that much earlier, as in if we did all these other things that you just mentioned that the European countries did, which is if we had brought the cases all the way down so that we actually do have sufficient testing, contact tracing, and other infrastructure. If we had ramped up our infrastructure enough, then we can use masks and social distancing, and we would be able to keep this virus at bay. But because we don't have those things, we need much more aggressive measures at this point, because otherwise the piecemeal solutions that we have are going to result in what we're seeing, which is these waves of infections. In some states, we control it only to have these waves crest in other places. And that's just going to continue because we don't have a national cohesive strategy.
I'm going to weigh in real quick and end this. The fact of the matter is, most countries does not operate like America operates, in buying today and hopefully paying tomorrow. I think that's one of the strategies that has messed us up, is that so many people owed so many bills, and I'm just not talking about the essentials pertaining to light bill, water bill, insurance, phone bill. I'm talking about all the bills that people have racked up. J.C. Penney, just deliberately racking up bill after bill after bill. Even their college degree bills and hospital bills and everything else. You have such of a society over here that is living paycheck to paycheck, buy today, pay tomorrow, that whenever this occurred, it was devastating from the beginning on an economical standpoint. More so than other countries, because other countries don't actually operate quite as loosely as we do. Now, I'm not saying that over in Germany that you can't buy a car if you got good credit, on credit, and buy it now and pay for it later, because you can. But by and large, it's not as loose as what it is over here in America. Over here in America, they'll loan somebody the money on a Land Rover or a BMW that the car payment is going to be $900 a month on a minimum, knowing that this couple just got through having a child and they're going to be struggling towards paying the bills in the next 5, 7, 10 years just because of this newly born child. We have people over here that are acting irresponsive whenever it comes to our financial difficulties that we're bearing. These burdens that have been placed upon to people. And I blame it on the professionals. I blame it on the greed. I blame it on the people that was striving towards wanting to live in that $2 million home versus that $150,000, $250,000 home. It's really, really bad whenever the proof is in the pudding pertaining to how that we have managed the outbreak, made worse in the U.S. than any other country in the world. But yet now we're supposed to be the smartest of the smart. We're supposed to be the toughest of the tough. We're supposed to be the number one leaders of the world. And whenever it comes to China stealing things and hacking into places where they shouldn't be going, they should be held responsible and accountable, just like China did not release to the world the severity of the problem on the front end of how lethal that this freaking disease really is and was. China failed the world whenever it comes to certain aspects that they should have raised a red flag on in regards to all this. And I'm just not talking about the international airplane flights. I'm talking about how that they tried to sequester the seriousness of this disease on the front end, either in November or December, way before we ever caught wind of it over here in January of 2020. China should be held responsible for putting out illegitimate, false reports and trying to sequester the truth about this disease. And of course you got the World Health that supported China hand in hand, fist in fist. And that's one reason why I feel like that Donald Trump got mad at the World Health Organization and cut off the funding in trying to penalize or punish them because of what that they done, that they didn't do, that they should have done on the front end of this COVID-19 pandemic. There's a lot of people that has dropped a lot of balls over here in America. But there's also a lot of people that dropped a lot of balls over in China that has costed America what America's going through right now. And people need to be willing to look at the big picture, the whole picture, and not just part of the picture. Yeah, there's been mistakes made. but who initiated those mistakes? Where did the big mistakes start from? On the front end. On the front end was the most valuable end, because if we could have controlled this on the front end of recognizing its dangers, maybe the Americans would have taken a brand new, whole new, different approach about this situation over here. But once more, to add insult to misery, I think the reason why that we never brought that plateau all the way down like they did in other countries was because too many people owes too much money over here in America, regardless whether it's a car payment or this bill or that bill or this or that. And because we have strained ourselves economically so thin, we have basically put ourselves in between a hard place and a rock, economically, financially speaking, to the point that people felt like that they had to get up and go back to work. It wasn't so much of what Donald Trump was doing. It was what we was all doing. Or it was so much as what we was all not doing that has caused this to even escalate to the point of 152,000 people dead and about 4.5 million people that has been checked into America towards being positive. As the Windmill Ministries always promotes on the last part of our message, good luck to all of us. Good luck to each and every one of us as we strive towards righteousness and as we want to continue to be in the hollow hand of our Creator, towards being obedient to Him, towards doing His will and not our own. Good luck to all of us, and God bless you for being a part of the Windmill Ministries and allowing for us to be a part of you. God bless the United States of America, and shalom.